The brutal truth no one dares to tell you. Nobody hates you. Let's start there. They don't ignore you because you disgust them. They don't disrespect you because you failed. It's worse than that. They tolerate you. They smile out of politeness. They listen out of obligation. And deep down, you know it. You feel it every time a conversation ends with a hollow yeah. For sure. You sense it in the way people keep you around, not because they admire you, but because you're convenient. Let's not sugarcoat it. You are not respected because you never set the tone. You never drew the line. You never established what happens when someone crosses it. You were agreeable. You were flexible. You confused being liked with being respected. But here's the Machiavellian law. In a world driven by power, the flexible don't bend. They break. Respect doesn't come from kindness. It doesn't rise from affection. It's not built on how soft your heart is. It's built on how cold your strategy is. The world does not reward emotional transparency. It respects what it fears losing. And if your absence holds no weight, then your presence holds no power. Let that disturb you, because if it doesn't, you're already fading. You see, when people believe there are no consequences for crossing you, they will cross you every time. When you smile to keep the peace, when you explain instead of enforce, when you tolerate out of fear of being alone, you are not being kind. You are volunteering for invisibility. Here's the part that stings. If you disappeared tomorrow, the world would keep spinning, untouched, unfazed, because you never gave it a reason to pause. And this is where most people collapse. They think that being generous earns respect, that being understanding will eventually be reciprocated. But listen carefully. In the hierarchy of human behavior, predictability, control, and consequence outrank goodwill every time. That's not cruelty. That's psychology. Your politeness has been mistaken for weakness. Your warmth has been interpreted as submission. You blend in. You become invisible architecture seen, but never remembered. So, if you still believe that being nice is enough to be respected, brace yourself. Because now, we're going to dissect the psychology behind why the world looks past you and how to ensure that it never happens again. Respect is not born from kindness, but from internal structure. Cold as steel respect is not an emotion. It is not something you earn through warmth, charm, or even competence. It is a structure, one built on 3 immovable pillars: predictable punishment, emotional control, strategic presence. I call this the Triad of Authority. And if even one of these is missing, you will be liked perhaps, but never respected. Let's break it down. First, predictable punishment. People do not respect vague consequences. They respect precision, just like gravity. You jump, you fall. No debate. Authority works the same way. When someone crosses your line, they should already know the outcome. No yelling, no emotional outbursts, no threats, just action. Immediate, clear, consistent. And yet, most people do the opposite. They talk about boundaries, but never enforce them. They give warning after warning, and then they forgive. They call it compassion. The world sees it as softness. And here is the price. When consequences are negotiable, so is your authority. And that is when people begin to test you, not because they are cruel, But because human beings are wired to look for structure, we push to see where the edge is. And when we find no edge, we lose respect for the terrain. Second, emotional control. Power does not scream. It does not beg. It does not break down. Real power is contained, cold, surgical. This is not about being heartless. It is about being untouchable. Because the moment you react emotionally, you hand over the blueprint to control you. If someone can trigger guilt, rage, or desperation in you, they can move you like a puppet. That is why emotional discipline is not a suggestion. It is a requirement. And here is what neuroscience tells us. The human brain, especially the limbic system, does not respond to please. It responds to patterns. We respect those who stay calm under pressure, not because they intimidate, but because their stillness signals mastery. They are not controlled by the environment. They are the environment. Third, strategic presence. Respect comes not only from what is said, but from what is withheld, from being intentional about where you show up, when you speak, and how you carry yourself. Think of the people you admire most. They are not always available. They do not chase approval. They appear when it matters. And when they do, they change the tone of the room. You must cultivate that same weight. Your presence must say one thing. I am not here because I need attention. I am here because I choose to be. Because when you show up without purpose, you blend in. You become background noise. Let me give you an image. A person without limits is like a river, flowing, adaptable. Eventually, they touch everything, but leave no mark. Now compare that to a mechanical watch. Precise, structured, reliable. It shapes schedules. It commands trust. Which one would you rather be? The one who flows endlessly and disappears, or the one people depend on to set the tempo? When you embody these three elements, predictable punishment, emotional control, strategic presence, you do not need to demand respect. It arrives on its own. People lower their voice around you. They weigh their words more carefully. They adjust their tone not because you ask them to, but because your structure leaves them no option. But here is the reality. Most people understand these principles in theory. They nod. They agree. But when someone tests them in real life, they hesitate. They explain. They compromise. Why? Because structure is hard to hold when you are emotionally hungry, when you are afraid of being disliked, when you still believe that being accepted matters more than being respected. That is where authority dies. Not with a loud betrayal, but with small concessions, soft exceptions, well-meaning self-betrayals. And each one chips away at your edge. But understanding structure is only the beginning. The real trial is in execution. And that is where most people collapse. Because authority requires cold, and most people are still too warm. One mistake. Total fallout. The Machiavellian art of consequence. Let's make something brutally clear from the start. Punishment is not about emotion. It is not about rage, raised voices, or emotional explosions. It is not about humiliating someone to feel powerful. Real punishment, true consequence, is quiet, precise, unapologetis. It is cold not because it lacks care, but because it is calculated. Like gravity, it doesn't ask for attention. It simply is. Consistent, predictable, unforgiving. And that's exactly why it commands respect. When someone violates your boundaries, the response must be immediate and surgical. No warnings, no debates, no desperate explanations to justify how you feel. Because here's what most people don't want to admit. The moment you get emotional about enforcing your standard, you've already lost leverage. Why? Because power thrives in clarity, not chaos. And when your reaction is emotional, reactive, or inconsistent, you communicate one thing: I can be pushed. And if you can be pushed, you will be. Again and again, until your boundaries become nothing more than background noise. Let's be even sharper here. Forgiveness, without consequence, is not a virtue. It's weakness in disguise. Every time you let someone slide, you train them. You reinforce the idea that your rules are optional, that your no has an invisible asterisk beside it. And over time, your word loses weight. Your presence loses edge. And you become forgettable. Now, let's talk about second chances. The golden myth. Yes, one mistake can be allowed. Yes, growth requires grace. But grace is not a revolving door. You offer someone a single opportunity to redeem themselves. Not because you're soft, but because you're strategic. However, when one-time mistakes become patterns, and forgiveness becomes your default setting, you're no longer in control. You're in captivity. You are not leading. You are being managed. And the person managing you is the one who knows you'll always say, "It's okay." That's not compassion. That's self-abandonment. Because people do not admire what always accommodates. They respect what eliminates. And yes, this comes with pain. Sometimes you'll have to walk away from someone you still love. Sometimes you'll cut ties with someone who didn't mean to. But hear this. Keeping the wrong person in your life will cost you more than losing them ever could. Machiavelli knew it well. Mercy has a cost. And when given too freely, it bankrupts your authority. Now, let's elevate the conversation. What separates the emotionally reactive from the strategically powerful, unspoken ultimatums? This is where the truly dominant play. They don't issue loud threats. They don't dramatize their standards. They don't need to, because their environment has been trained. When they draw a boundary, the world feels it. No repetition, no reminders, just presence and consequence. People already know what will happen if they cross the line, because they've seen what happens to those who did. That is real influence. That is silent fear. You don't say, "If you do this again, I'm done." They already know, because your track record speaks louder than your words ever could. And this applies everywhere. In business, you let a team member miss a deadline and offer nothing but a warning. Your standards just dropped. In relationships, you tolerate betrayal and cover it up with emotional speeches. Your trust just lost value. With friends, you set boundaries and then break them yourself just to keep the peace. You've just taught them those boundaries were performative. Now, if you want to go even deeper into power, master the exit. Make your absence heavier than your presence. Let that become your strategy. People shouldn't fear your reaction. They should fear your removal, your silence, your disappearance. Because when you leave, it's not noise that goes with you. It's structure. It's meaning. It's clarity. You don't destroy them. You delete yourself from their world. And in that silence, they feel it all. Why? Because people don't actually miss you. They miss who they got to be when they had access to you. They miss the reflection of their better self that existed in your presence. And when that reflection vanishes, they feel the void. So here's your new standard. Make access to you expensive. Your time is not free. Your presence is not guaranteed. Your forgiveness is not infinite. Become the kind of person whose world operates on principle, where your absence is a lesson and your silence is a signal. You won't need to demand respect. You become it. Because yes, punishment is part of the equation, but the higher game, the elite tier of psychological strategy, is crafting a life where people fear disappointing you more than they fear losing you. But the enemy of command is not noise. It's warmth. And nothing melts your psychological structure faster than unguarded empathy. Excessive empathy, the emotional drug that destroys power. Let's talk about one of the most seductive and underestimated traps in human behavior. Empathy. Yes, empathy. The very thing that allows us to connect, to understand, to care. But here's the cold truth. Empathy, when unregulated, can quietly destroy your authority. Because when you forgive out of guilt, when you tolerate disrespect out of loneliness, when you collapse your own values, the moment someone sheds a tear or tells you a tragic story, you are not being strong. You are self-destructing. Slowly, quietly, elegantly. Let's make something uncomfortably clear. Forgiveness without structure is not virtue. It is self-erasure. And no matter how noble your intentions may be, no one respects the person who shrinks themselves to make others feel bigger. In fact, psychological research confirms this over and over. The person who forgives too easily isn't admired. They're exploited. You don't get a gold medal for being endlessly understanding. You get ignored. You get taken for granted. And worst of all, you get disrespected not because you're weak, but because you've trained others to see you as optional. Now let's peel back another layer. There's a psychological role that many people unconsciously adopt in their relationships. It's called the martyr, the one who absorbs pain, the one who justifies mistreatment, the one who sacrifices their own needs, boundaries, and peace of mind just to maintain harmony. But here's the brutal reality. Martyrs don't gain respect. They gain pity. And pity is not power. The world does not follow those who burn themselves to keep others warm. It follows those who know how to say, I understand your pain, but I will not abandon my principles because of it. That one sentence changes everything. It transforms you from a cushion into a force. Because you're not cold, you're calibrated. You're not harsh, you're anchored. Now let's bring in a crucial term, sympathetic self-betrayal. It's what happens when your empathy becomes so overwhelming that you start betraying yourself in the process. You excuse behavior that violates your standards. You allow toxic dynamics to linger because you understand where they're coming from. You tolerate manipulation because they're hurting too. But let's set the record straight. Understanding someone's pain does not make their behavior acceptable. You can validate someone's wounds and still walk away. You can recognize someone's trauma and still say no. You can care deeply and still protect your boundaries. That is not cruelty. That is leadership. Because being a leader of your life, your mind, your energy requires a brutal kind of discipline. The ability to say no, even when your heart says yes. And yes, it feels awful. Saying no to someone you understand feels heartless. It triggers guilt, doubt, even shame. But that discomfort is the price of sovereignty. And every time you override it, every time you say yes when your soul screams no, you weaken your foundation. You blur the lines between compassion and submission. And here's the danger. People learn quickly. If tears bend your rules, if guilt buys them access, if emotional chaos overrides your clarity, they will use it. Not because they're malicious, but because you taught them it works. Now, here's the pivot. The psychological strategy. You must become emotionally bilingual. Internally, speak empathy. Feel it. Understand it. Witness the pain of others. But externally, act through principle. Be steady. Be fair. Be consistent. Because consistency creates a safety, even for those who cry the loudest. Empathy without limits is emotional leakage. And once people sense that your emotions can be weaponized against you, they will do it consciously or not. That's why you must learn the art of calibrated compassion. You are not a lifeboat. You are a lighthouse. You shine. You guide. But you do not abandon your post to swim into the storm. Here's the final truth. Power is not the absence of empathy. It's the presence of boundaries within empathy. It's the ability to feel deeply without folding. It's the rare strength to say, I see your pain, but I still choose what's right for me. That's the difference between an emotional sponge and an emotional sovereign. So, what's the takeaway? It's this: empathy is sacred, but only when you remain intact while offering it. If it bleeds you dry, if it erases your standards, if it turns you into an emotional doormat, then it's no longer empathy. It's addiction. To preserve your clarity, your dignity, and your strength, you must resist the urge to over-identify with the pain of others. Because once you master the inner fortitude to deny access without guilt, you unlock a new layer of presence, one that radiates strength, respect, and unshakable self-command. And that's when the world finally sees you not as someone who's nice, but as someone who is undeniably necessary. Disappear strategically. The silent mastery of power. Let's talk about presence. Not charisma, not noise, but the strategic use of presence as a psychological tool. Because here's the paradox. Most people never grasp the more available you are, the less value you project, and the more you insert yourself into every space, every message, every moment, the more forgettable you become. People don't respect what's constantly present. They respect what's rare, what's deliberate, what's earned. This is where power becomes quiet. Not in what you say, but in how selectively you show up. Let's be clear. You don't need to ghost people. You don't need to withdraw completely. You need to be intentional. Your presence should never be automatic, online or offline. If people assume access, they stop valuing you. Accessibility erodes value, not by intention, by pattern recognition. This is what we call the perceived value matrix. Human beings assign worth based on two things: scarcity and precision. Something that is always around loses emotional weight, but something that appears at the right time, in the right way, creates impact. That's why the people who walk in silence for weeks but speak when it matters shift the entire room when they do. When they appear, everything recalibrates because they don't chase visibility. They command it. That's no accident. It's strategy. Now, Let's talk digital behavior. In this era of constant online presence, being always accessible has become the default. Always online, always replying, always available. But here's what most don't understand. The more digitally present you are, the more disposable you appear. People start to treat your attention like a cheap resource. They expect instant access, and the moment you break that rhythm, you're punished for it. That's because you've trained them to see you as a constant, not a force, not a presence. Just another presence the world scrolls past. And leaders are never background. They do not show up everywhere. They do not explain themselves. And they certainly do not fight to stay visible. They allow their absence to create the echo, and that echo becomes louder than any post, message, or reminder ever could. So how do you shift the dynamic? It starts with deliberate withdrawal, not to punish, not to manipulate, but to remind the world that your energy is not free, that your attention must be earned, that your silence is not absence, it is positioning. Here's the tactical shift. Respond slowly, not because you're rude, because you're precise. Don't jump into every conversation. Don't RSVP to every invitation. Don't offer access just because it's requested. Because when you learn to say, "I'm not available," not because I'm busy, but because I'm focused elsewhere, you reclaim power most people never realize they've given away. This is not arrogance. It's structure. It's boundaries. It's command presence, without needing to command anything at all. You're no longer reactive. You become selective. And that single switch from availability to intentionality can redefine how people perceive you forever. Because here's the truth. People chase what retreats. They analyze what's silent, and they respect what chooses when and how to engage. You've now understood the psychology of presence, how being seen less can actually make you more powerful. But real power doesn't just come from managing your image. It begins in the hardest place of all, the ability to control your inner hunger for validation. You don't need to be loved. You need to be untouchable. Here's one of the most uncomfortable truths about human dynamics. The need to be loved makes you controllable. The moment you crave acceptance, the moment you begin chasing approval, you compromise your position. You soften your posture. And worst of all, you become predictable. Because those who need love will bend to keep it. They will negotiate their values to preserve it. And they will tolerate disrespect just to avoid feeling alone. But make no mistake, respect and craving cannot coexist. The one who commands respect does not beg for attention. They do not ask to be seen. They do not seek to be liked, because their value is internal, and their presence speaks louder than any plea ever could. Let's draw the line here. There is a difference between being respected and being noticed. Being noticed is easy. Raise your voice. Show more skin. Post more opinions. But being respected, that requires restraint. It requires stillness. It requires you to not need anything from anyone. Let's go deeper. From a neurological standpoint, the human brain does not associate leadership with emotional neediness. It's the opposite. The limbic system, our emotional processor, instinctively respects those who stay calm under pressure, who don't chase connection, and who maintain their center, regardless of who enters or exits their life. Why? Because neediness creates emotional unpredictability, and unpredictability feels unsafe. But those who are calm, grounded, and consistent Send a message to the nervous system. This person cannot be manipulated. They are safe to follow, not because they're passive, but because they're self-contained. Now here's where true authority crystallizes in what I call silent standards. These are not the rules you announce. They are the lines you never need to say out loud, because your actions enforce them effortlessly. People know how to treat you, not because you told them, but because you showed them. You don't argue your boundaries. You don't plead for respect. You simply act with such clarity and consistency that your silence becomes law. This is the final evolution of power. Not the power to persuade, but the power to not need persuasion at all. People who respect themselves at this level don't ask, will they still like me if I say no? They already know the answer. And they're fine with it either way. Because once you reach this state where your approval comes from within, where your rules are internalized, and your identity is unshakable, you become untouchable. And when you are untouchable, you don't need to demand respect. You become the standard. Others calibrate themselves around you. They speak more carefully. They offer more. They try harder, because they know that access to your space is earned, never assumed. Now understand, this is not something you can fake. People will test your posture. They will observe whether your silence holds weight, or whether it's just a tactic for attention. That's why this state requires discipline. It requires a personal ritual, a system of principles that cannot be broken, even when no one is watching. Because the final level of respect is not about public reputation. It's about private integrity. And once you reach this level, you no longer chase respect. You set the tone. You become the benchmark. But to maintain that, you need something more powerful than approval. You need a non-negotiable code, a personal system that governs you when no one else is looking. So here's your next move. Not a thought, not a quote, a code written in action. And it starts now. The manifesto of the untouchable. I will be respected for what I do not negotiate, not for my kindness, not for my patience, but for the boundaries I do not explain and the standards I do not bend. Because in the end, you are not what you say yes to. You are what you refuse to tolerate. The world does not reward those who are good. It rewards those who are clear. You can be generous. You can be empathetic. But if you do not respect your time, your energy, and your space, no one else will. Let this be your turning point. Because those who do not respect themselves are not corrected by the world. They are erased by it. You are not here to be liked. You are not here to be understood. You are here to make space, bend around your presence, not to be noticed, but to be impossible to ignore. And that begins with action, not thoughts, not promises, but action. So do it now. Write down 5 boundaries that are non-negotiable. The ones you've let slide for too long, the ones you've kept soft out of fear of judgment. Make them law. Then, cut off one person who does not respect your time. No explanation, no announcement, just distance. Because every second you give to the undeserving is a second stolen from your own evolution. And if that sounds harsh, good. Because if it doesn't hurt a little, you're not doing it right. Discipline isn't glamorous, but it is divine. It is the hidden engine behind silent power. It is the unseen structure behind every person you've ever truly admired. It is what makes your presence felt, even when you say nothing. So remember this: respect is never the goal. It is the byproduct of ruthless self-discipline. It's what happens when you become the kind of person who does not flinch, who does not chase, who does not apologize for standing where others collapse. And if you're still hesitating, if you're telling yourself, maybe I'll start tomorrow, then let me tell you this. If you don't do it today, you will be treated tomorrow exactly the way you were ignored yesterday. Boundaries that aren't enforced become invitations. If you don't build your spine, the world will bend it for you. And today is the only day you own. So start now. Be respected not because you demanded it, but because you left no other option. You are the standard. Act like it.